Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Religion Unplugged podcast. This is Matthew Peterson, and today I will be interviewing Bill Tenny-Brittian. Bill is a church planter and writer who recently wrote a book entitled 101 Things You Can Do to Help Grow Your Church. Bill, thank you so much for talking with me today.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, so just to start off, I think it's probably helpful to kind of establish terms. In your book, the title of the book is 100 Things You Can Do to Help Grow Your Church. What does church growth look like to you? What does that mean?
Well, back in the, long before you were born, back in the 1970s and 80s, actually started in the 50s, the church growth movement was born. And the church growth movement really was born out of Donald McGavran, who was a missionary to India, American missionary to India, and he realized that he began gathering data. And up until that point, the church had not really gathered data in terms of who became disciples, how many people got baptized, what happened when you had someone who was influential in the community become a Christian. And he began tracking that and documenting that and realized there were some patterns. And so he came back to the U.S. and said, he looked at the state of the church, and back in the 50s, the church looked really good in the United States. But in the 60s, us baby boomers, we began to defect. And he began to say, this isn't going to be good in the long run. Let me share some of the insights that I've had with the church in India. And I think that this, if you will, scientific approach of looking at statistics, looking at what's going on, looking at sociological patterns, and so on, we can apply that and we can learn how to reach out beyond the church. Because in the 50s, 60s, actually before the 1950s, and even now in a lot of churches, the growth is dependent on mom and dad come to church, they bring their kids stay, they have kids, the kids get indoctrinated and become disciples of Jesus, and they get baptized, and we have been dependent for generations on biological growth. The reality is that the majority of new conversions in the Christian church across the generations has been very little evangelism to those who are outside the church. There's always been some, but mostly it's been biological growth. We have kids, the kids come, they stay, they become Christians, And now and again, you find a unicorn and you bring someone into the faith, they get baptized as an adult, but that hasn't been the norm, and it wasn't the norm back in the 50s and 60s either. And McGavran and his group really said, we've got to apply these practices so that we can reach those who are not Christians and begin to establish or bring in the kingdom of God as Jesus kind of defined it, people who are citizens of two different worlds. And so church growth for me is really, it's less about biological growth and more about how do we reach people in our community? How do we reach the nuns? How do we reach the duns? Although the nuns used to be in church and they quit. But how do we reach the nuns? How do we reach those who believe in other faiths? I'm not above, if you will, proselytizing. I don't think we do evangelism by force or by coercion or even by arguments. You just share, who you are, what you found effective, and people either get attracted to that or not. Jesus didn't bend anyone's arm to say, be a disciple. If they said no, he let them make their adult decision, let them walk away. He didn't try and convince them. And I think that's the model for today. You share what you've experienced, you share your commitment and how God is working in your life, Jesus has worked in your life. And if someone says, wow, how do I have that? How I want a piece of that, then, and that's good evangelism. So church growth is about evangelism and discipleship. So that's a long answer to a short question.
Right. No, that's what I want. That's okay. That makes a lot of sense. And so then going off of that, kind of on the flip side, what do you think is the chief stunter of church growth, if there is one, or are there multiple?
Oh, there's lots of them. The state we find ourselves in the United States, we blame COVID for a lot of things, but all COVID did was accelerate what was already happening in the church. We were losing people. The majority of churches pre-COVID 85% of churches in the United States were either on plateau or they were in decline. And in the way I look at, and I've been working with churches for over 40 years, and that when you're on a plateau, you're in decline, you just don't know it yet, because the people are going to start dying and the church is going to start doing this. Because if you're not bringing new people in, then you're in trouble. In fact, Tom Rayner Lifeway Research last year came out and said, listen, we need to be replacing about 32% of our people every year in order to be sustainable and look towards growth. That's a lot of people. That's getting 32 new people in every year because of what Len Sweet calls the death tsunami, that we're in a place where the boomers are going to start dying. And there's a lot of boomers in the church, and a lot fewer Gen X and even fewer millennials. And let's go to Gen Z. There's like, church? What church? Why? So we're going to be doing this really quick. We've got to do something differently. So I don't remember that answers the question. At this point, I don't remember what the question was.
It was just, what is the most common stunter of church growth?
Okay, all right, thank you. The big stunt. Okay, culture is part of it. But the reality, folks, is we've kind of helped foster that culture by being lazy in terms of reaching out to the community. It's been about us. It's about, us Christians in the church, and we live in our sanctuaries, which are safe places to protect us from the big bad world. And our church growth movement has been, we put up a sign that says, y'all come, everyone's welcome. And we think that people are going to walk by, oh, I've never thought of that. Let me go to church. It doesn't work. Our church growth stuff, practices have been hideous. In fact, most have been non-existent. We do fundraisers and hope that people will come to our church. We have a food pantry. Don't get me wrong. We should do good things. Okay, we should do good works. But how many people are now disciples of Jesus Christ, baptized and active in your church from your food pantry? The chances are it's zero. And it's not that we shouldn't be doing good stuff. We absolutely should, but we need to. It sounds kind of crass, but we need to leverage that. Jesus didn't do good works just to heal everybody. If he did, he'd have visited, at the pool of Siloam, he'd have healed everyone, not just the one guy who wanted, do you want to get well? No one will put me in the water. Jesus, the guy never says yes, and yet Jesus heals him anyway. But he didn't heal, as far as we know, anybody else. Jesus wasn't in that ministry. He was in the ministry of, I'm the Son of God, and I'm going to do things to attract people into that venue. We need to do the same thing. We do good works so that we can attract people into the kingdom of God, into Christianity. So the biggest block is us. We're depending on marketing, and y'all come, and the Great Commission is y'all go. We haven't done a lot of the going.
Right. And so what do you think say a food pantry that actually evangelizes well looks like without being something that, as you mentioned earlier, twists somebody's arm?
There's two things that we need to, and this is, I'm dancing on not being as politically correct as some people would like to hear, but we're going to speak truth. In most churches that have food pantries, not all, but in most churches that have food pantries, those that they serve, those that are coming for handouts and hopefully hand-ups, and hopefully we're doing our evangelism. Don't get me wrong, that's important. We'll talk about that momentarily. But that most of those folks, if they decided to attend your worship service, they would feel out of place. They'd be lost. And I don't care how friendly your church thinks it is. Most churches are convinced they're the friendliest church in town. And I do this all the time when I do church consultations. I have a group of people come up and I have them get into a group hug. And it looks wonderful. Oh, look at everyone's house. They love on each other. But then I'll look at the congregation and say, what do you see? Well, what do you see is everyone's backside, because everyone's looking inward at themselves. And no one's being mean. They're being wonderful, but what happens in most churches is it's mostly about us. And if a visitor comes, hey, how's it going? Glad to see you, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't have conversations. And I mean, real conversations. Good morning, welcome to Walmart does not make you feel warm and fuzzy. Good morning, welcome to First Church does not make you feel warm and fuzzy. It's sitting down and having a conversation, getting to know the person, where they come from, how often they be coming here, and what keeps them busy during the week and so on. That's a conversation. So if someone from the food pantry, a client, if you will, they're the clients, and they showed up, even if they had conversations, in general, in most churches, there's this huge gap socioeconomically. Not always, but often the people who are being served have almost nothing in common with the majority of the church members. And here's the truth, is that evangelism that is effective, discipleship that is effective, in general, means that we are building relationships with people. And it's hard to build a relationship with someone that you don't share the same values, you don't have any very few similar experiences, education, and all that. Yes, we should be, and we want to embrace. But the reality is that if they don't feel comfortable, they're probably not the future members and church leaders of our church. Now, they're the future of someone's church. And the question is, are we effective at making disciples of Jesus, or are we effective at trying to bring in new church members? And there's a huge difference. There are those who are in the food pantry, and you asked about the effectiveness. The effectiveness of a food pantry. I work with a group of churches, a group of pastors in what's called my Growing Church Network. These are pastors who are across the U.S. and Canada, and we meet every week, and we do training, and we do coaching. And I have one gal in a very, very rural area. She's a United Methodist pastor, and they have a Thursday table, they call it. It's not a food pantry, it's a community meal. This is a church with average worship attendance of about 22 or 23. They serve over 100 people every week from the community. And this church continually does that. Now, in general, most of the time, the majority of those people would not necessarily fit into this church. Again, the relationship bit misses. However, this church has said, we're not going to let that get in the way. And so what they have done is the membership shows up to the Thursday, they call it Thursday table, and instead of handing out the food, they hand out the food and go sit with the people. They have conversations with the people, and not just superficial conversations. It's, how can we help you? What's going on in your life? And those kind of questions that come not immediately, hey, what's going on in your life? That you have to be here. That's not friendly, but they build relationships, have conversations, they care, they help the people, and they've taken in like a half a dozen new members from that table, plus they've done baptisms, and plus they're helping people experience the love of Jesus Christ in that setting by building relationships, by caring, and that's, to answer your question, Matthew, that's how you do it. You don't just hand out food. You build relationships. You get to know these people and offer them hope. And when I say offer them hope, it's not your life is really out of control. You need to change it. No one wants to. They may know that, but no one wants to have that pointed out to them from someone who's we're helping you. It becomes patriarchal. We don't want that. What we want is real relationships, and evangelism that is effective. It happens over time today. It doesn't happen at the Billy Graham Crusades. Remember the Billy Graham Crusades, long before your time again. But Billy Graham Crusades had thousands of people show up, became Christians, but everyone understood the story. Everyone knew who Jesus was. I mean, we were praying in school at that point. Everyone, and I don't mean everyone, but virtually everyone, understood the Christian story. That's not the case today. We're starting off with people who have, they either have a dim view of church, or church is just like, yeah, whatever. I don't know what they do over there. I've seen it on TV. I've never watched a whole service because, how TV is, blah, blah. So they don't really know. And so they're starting from zero. And it takes a while to build a relationship, to be able to share your faith, and for them to see how faith is working in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really curious then, you talked earlier about the generational divides of, we've got a lot of boomers in church, then it kind of gets less and less with every generation. And then you're just talking about how, Gen Z, millennials didn't really grow up. Everybody knew the gospel. What do you think the trajectory is of millennials, Gen Z? Will we become more religious and spiritual as we get older? Or is it going to be distinctly different because we weren't raised with as much religiosity around us?
Well, obviously it's a tough question, because predicting what's going to happen. But
right.
Here's the reality. If the church doesn't make some changes, the trajectory that we're on is the trajectory we're going to end up with. So boomers left the church, not completely, but by and large. We left the church, but most boomers had some church experience to back up on. We were taken to church when we were kids, or we went to church with a friend. We have most of us have some experience, but the youngest boomer now is about 66 years old. So we're the old group. Most of us did not take our kids to church, but grandma did.
Right.
Or they went with a friend or whatever. So Gen Z has a smattering, and I'm talking bell curve. Of course, there are people in Gen Z who were raised in the church, Gen X, that were raised in the church. But we're talking bell curve here. The majority of Gen Xers, they went to church once or twice in their life, maybe 4 or 5 times. They have a smattering of church experience. They hated it by and large. It was boring. It was written for adults. They were kids, and it went right over their heads. We didn't, back in the day, we thought that the way to raise kids in the church was to make them sit in the adult service so they knew how to worship properly. They were bored out of their skulls. They hated it. And as soon as they made a decision that I'm not going there. Why would I go there? I don't get it. It didn't mean anything to me. So although Gen X has some experience, a lot of it is negative, and a good bit of it's neutral, but they did not raise the millennials in church at all. Millennials, by and large, have no church experience. Now, that's bell curve. There's a lot of millennials that have been to church now and again. Of course, there's millennials in church, but by and large, they weren't raised in church. And so Andy Stanley has this great story in one of his books, and I ought to know the name of the book that I'm quoting at, but I'm old and ADHD, so we'll go with that. Anyway, in this, he lives. His house is in Alpharetta, which is outside of it's in the Atlanta area, and they drive when they get down to church. He and his family pile into their. In my head, I see the station wagon. I'm probably pretty sure it's a minivan. But anyway, they drive home. They're driving through some beautiful areas in which there are lots of horse farms. And they have riding lessons and, barrel racing and da-da-da. And Andy's saying, as they go home, he says, they see these signs, first free lesson, horse riding. He says, but they're not horse people. They're not against horses. They're not against people who ride horses. But they're not horse people. And so when they see a sign that says, hey, your first free lesson or, a special grand opening, whatever, there's no temptation, no real interest for them to go because they're not horse people. Well, the majority of millennial people, the millennials, are not church people. They're not opposed to the church. It's just like they go by a church and go, yeah, well, that's interesting. And they probably even appreciate some of the work that the church does. And of course, they also frown at some of the things the church does. But, they're not necessarily opposed to church. It's just that, why would I go? And Christians often have this understanding that if they just invite them, in fact, there's statistics that say 80% of Americans would come to church if invited by a close friend or relative. And my response when I hear that statistic is, how's that working for you? Mm-hmm. When you invite, are they 86% more likely to show up? The answer to that is no. The majority of people say no, because the what's in it for me in the back of their head is going, there ain't nothing there for me. I'm not a church person. why would I go? I'm going to go see songs I don't know, with people I'm uncomfortable with, or at least I suspect, and they may be like me, they may not, but what if I slip and drop the F-bomb, which is a part of my everyday language, or maybe just a damn, or using Jesus in the middle. I don't know if this is a good idea, and I remember it was pretty boring the last time I have things I do on Sunday. I get up every morning and I go to Starbucks and I flip through the free Wall Street Journal that they have there, and I go home and I'm scrolling and da da da. They have their Sunday morning rituals just like a Christian has, and if we're going to get a millennial to show up at church, we had better be pretty clear about what we're offering that will answer the what's in it for me on their part. And so if we're going to turn this around, the church has to rethink what we're offering. I can't tell you how many churches I work with that say, what we really need, we need to move from the organ and the piano and to praise music and rock and roll music, and then people will start coming. Nobody listening to this, and no one who won't listen to this in the U.S., who's unchurched, no one on Sunday morning woke up and stretched and said, oh, if I could just find a church that had good music, I'd go to it. No. No one's waiting for good music to go to church. And so launching a new worship service with good music isn't going to attract those who have never been in church or are not church people. If we're going to get them in, we're going to have to offer them some sort of life transforming opportunity. Something that they go, oh, I need to be a part of that. A relationship with someone who's a Christian, who they go, man, I'd like to have a life like that. I'd like, when my cat dies, I want to be able to handle as well as they did. Or when some terrible thing happens in their life, I want to be able to do like that. Or when I do something really stupid, they owned it. They took responsibility for it. They made it right. That's not normal. I'm interested in that. So that's one way, is relationships. And the other is, no one wants to go to church on Sunday who's not church. That's not on the list. They don't want to go. If they wanted to go, they'd have gone. But everyone has a problem they need to get solved. Everybody has a problem. So, Matt, I don't know what your burning problem, but let's just wave a magic wand and say that, I don't know, you're a podcaster and a writer, and I know what podcasters and writers make. we moonlight on this. So maybe let's say you got student loans, which you're university, so you're getting student loans probably, and so 10 years from now, you're maybe not over your head in debt, but you're not making the money you'd like. You're wondering what you should do and da-da-da. And then you have a Christian friend, a church friend, who says, hey, the pastor's talking about how to get out of debt and how to live a debt-free life. And it's a practical 3-week series on financial investments and da-da-da, biblically based. And Matt might go, I could use that kind of advice. It won't hurt me to go 3 weeks. Last week this week, this is what, so Monday night, talked with one of the pastors I work with at Growing Church Network, doing some coaching, and the pastor was saying that they had just finished a 5-week series on biblical leadership, what it means to be a leader in today's world. They had someone from the Chamber of Commerce who is not a Christian, had heard about the series and attended all 5 sessions. And was like, I need to hear this. This is good stuff. And he went the first time. It was relevant. It was practical. He thought it was valuable, and it was biblical. And he said, I want to come out. He never missed a session. Now, this is someone who's not a Christian, who is in business, and this is a church that averages about 40. So this is not like this big mega church, but the pastor understood that to reach the unchurched, you've got to offer something that an unchurched person would want. And in the end, in the pastor's words, he says, my goal is to get that guy baptized. We want to build relationships. We want to keep having lunches with him, sharing our faith and living our lives and showing him how a relationship with Jesus actually matters in the wallet. And I'm not talking about health and welfare gospel, okay? I'm talking about just living life better. And so, anyway, so what's the trajectory? If something doesn't change, it's going to continue to crash and burn. But as pastors and churches learn that what used to work doesn't work now, and what works now is building bridges that other people need, bridges that they want, not bridges we want, and helping them cross it will be the future of the church.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like one of the main things you've been saying, and one of the main things that your recent book was saying, is that, more basically individuals in the church need to start taking more responsibility and not just giving all of the weight of responsibility onto the pastor, the administration, whatever it may be. Why did you feel uniquely compelled to start writing a lot more about the individual? And what are some of the major themes in your book about what individuals can do that kind of encompass a lot of the many, many, many specific ways that you said that we can help grow the church?
One of the reasons I just reached out and got my book, 101 Things, which now, of course, is backwards. But anyway, 101 Things You Can Do to Grow Your Church is, I was a pastor of a church. I was a pastor. I was in congregational ministry for 40 years. And pre-COVID, I had a lay person, a non-clergy, non-preacher type, not church staff, come to me and says, you talk about church growth a lot. Can you recommend a church growth book that's written for not pastors, written for laity? And I said, sure, I'll find one. And so I went up to Amazon.com and I searched, and I searched, and I searched. And there weren't any. I could not find a book on church growth written for lay people. And so I decided I'd write one. And that's how 101 Things That You Can Do to Help Grow Your Church got written. And it's a church growth book for lay people. And really, it is literally, they're very short chapters, obviously, because 101 Things would be a lot, very long book if they were big chapters. But every chapter is one way that is an idea that a person who's in the church, not necessarily the pastor, in fact, not even the pastor, things they can do to communicate with their neighbor that they're churched, that there's stuff going on that is important and life transforming and hope imbuing kind of things that they might be interested in. Now it helps if the pastor is trained and is not. I always use this example, but it's a good example. No one lost sleep this week trying to understand the Trinity. Not one person went to bed and said, man, I can't sleep because I don't understand how the Trinity works. And yet we preach on the Trinity, we preach on Epiphany, we preach on lots of words and stuff that the unchurched don't care about. And if they showed up on that Sunday, they would walk away going, yeah, that's kind of what I thought church was about. And they wouldn't be back because there was nothing there for them. If they want friends, there's lots of places to find friends other than church. If they want good music, there's lots of clubs that got good music. And let's be honest, most people who are not in church, when they go to church, they don't find good music. Not they're under that. It's like, I would never go down and do karaoke with How Great Thou Art. Sorry, just not doing it, etc. So if the sermon is irrelevant and or not valuable, it's great to hear a sermon about the working through Philippians. Okay, Philippians is a great book. Okay, but if and I may go away, well, that was interesting, but if it wasn't valuable, if it doesn't do anything for me, if it doesn't show me how to live a better life, then what's the point? So it's helpful. These are helpful if we are actually offering something. So when an unchurched person shows up, they go, oh man, a leadership series? And it's a practical leadership series, biblically based and practical. I like that. How to deal with bullies, how to deal with, whatever. And it's all in there. The New Testament is filled with training for all of life's problems. We have to dig in there, but it's there. And this isn't about, I'm not advocating pop psychology or whatever. I'm advocating solid biblical answers to life's real problems. And these will help someone, say, oh, hey, we got this going on in the church. We got that going on in the church. We have an event coming up that we're having, childcare experts coming and talking about how to raise your kids or da-da-da-da-da-da. And so these things are based on how do we get our next door neighbor who has their own Sunday ritual, how do we get them interested in maybe attending something that we're doing? And some of the ideas are, just build relationships. The majority of people, it seems like in the United States, we go to work, we pull into our driveway, the garage door goes up, it swallows us, it goes back down, and we don't see our neighbors again at all. Maybe we cut the grass perhaps at the same time they are, but we don't know our neighbors. So it talks about getting to know your neighbors, having dinner with your neighbors, and coworkers. You've got, and everyone has a sphere of influence that includes friends and relatives, some acquaintances, their neighbors, co-workers, and pretty much everyone else. And if you spell that out, it spells France. And it just happens to work out that way. But everyone has a France. We have friends and relatives and acquaintances and neighbors and co-workers that we have relationships with. Pick out the ones that you have the best shot at, people who are in transition, people with whom are struggling with something. Build relationships. Build relationships because we build relationships and we care, not because they're our mark, like, we're a con man and we selected them. We think maybe we can get them to be in. No, go be a friend. And then as they see your life and you have conversations, they go, wow, this stuff is real for you, isn't it? So that's the premise, is build a relationship, find ways to build bridges, and then find a way to build bridges into the church. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Do you have kind of favorite stories of maybe specific examples that inspired because you have very hyper specific like chapter titles, like you have Never Eat Alone, Pray for Your City, Be a Lifelong Learner, and you have ones that are way more specific than that. Do you have specific stories that kind of back up those that you can tell me?
Almost everything in that book comes from 40 years of being a church planter and a church turnaround guy. Every church I did, I either started the church, or my wife and I started the church, or I was the pastor of church, and most of the churches I went to were in decline. In fact, all the churches I went to were in decline, and we turned that around into growth. And so everything I have in there is based on something we did or something I learned about. I'm the publisher of Net Results magazine, and so I have pastors writing for that. Net Results is the oldest church growth magazine in the United States. It's been around since 1980, and so I learned from other pastors as well. But toss out another title here. I got it right here. Read Your Way to Church Growth, which is not about reading books. It's about, hey, have you ever thought about going out to, taking a book with you? I have a book I wrote, and this is not a pitch for the book. I have a book called Prayer for People Who Can't Sit Still. It doesn't smack of Christianity. It's not a Bible. Okay, if you take a Bible to Starbucks and you put it down on your table, the only people who are going to have a conversation with you are other Christians. A non-Christian is going to run. They want nothing to do with anyone who has a Bible flipped out there. But if you have a book like Prayer for People Who Can't Sit Still, here's what I've found. People walk by, they see that book, and oh, I know someone who needs that book, or man, I need that book. I can't sit still, and it's irrelevant that I wrote it. The fact is that now I have a conversation with someone. So take a book. If you're going to Starbucks, take a book that is going to invite a comment. And again, Prayer for People that can't sit still is a good book. There's a bunch of them out there. Things that are have an interesting title, and just put it out there while you're drinking your coffee, and it's real possible someone will stop by, and now you're gonna have a conversation. And here's the next bit. Is if they have time, you say, sit down, let's talk about this. And it's not an evangelism conversation, it is, But you're not going to say, "Do you know Jesus?" That's they'll flee for the hills. But a little conversation. Say, "Hey, I'm here on Thursdays. You want to stop by? I'd love to have another conversation with you. Here's my card." Or, can I get contact information? I'd love to go with you to lunch or whatever. And now you've built a little bit of a bridge. You've begun to build a relationship with someone. You don't know at that moment whether they go to church or not. The odds are they don't. But, you don't know that. They might be a Christian. Build a relationship. If every Christian did that, a half a dozen, well, let's just say once a month. So 12 times a year, they did something that connected with someone they don't know or a neighbor, whatever, and they began to build that relationship. Our churches would be almost standing room only if everyone was doing that, because you talk to 12 people, build relationships with 12 people. Odds are that in time, one or two of those people might actually accompany you to church, especially if your pastor is doing sermon series that makes sense to them, or you can pitch it as such. Hey, my pastor's talking about money the next Friday, and it's not about giving; it's about how to invest or whatever. And they go, "Oh, I'd love to hear that," especially after they trust you and seen your life and et cetera. No one's. I love people, church members, who are standing in the checkout line and they have a conversation. Say, "Do you have a church home?" Now, I'll be honest with you, in 40 years, I've only known that conversation to turn into a new church visitor, maybe once or twice. Most of the time, people go, "Yeah, I'm not looking for a church home." It's a little soon to offer that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting that we stop doing that, okay? If you got people who are doing that, God bless them. They're doing something. Awesome. But there's more effective ways of doing that. Again, instead of inviting them to church, invite them to something that's life transforming. Instead of saying you're looking for a church home, I see you're buying generic stuff. Smart move. You're saving some money. In August, our pastor's talking about how to invest. And people look, why would the pastor be talking about how to invest? Well, because Jesus did. He talked about the talents, the 10 talents, 5 talents. That was about investments. There was an expectation that they're investing and making more money. Why aren't we talking about that? I don't know. That's a good question. Anyway, so that's one. Well, that's one of them, and they're all just as practical. Take a hike, change of life. You're walking around your neighborhood, and maybe pray for the houses you go by. And when someone says, they see you going every Thursday at 4:00, you take your walk, and one of your neighbors is there, say, "Hey, I see you walking all the time." "Yeah, I just enjoy it. And I'm praying for my neighbors." "You're doing what?" "Yeah, I pray for you." "Anything I can pray for you for?" What an incredible way of beginning to build a bridge. I've never had anyone say, "Ben, I don't want you praying for me." Almost everyone, even an atheist generally, is like, "Great, you want to pray for them?" They think it's doing nothing, but the fact that you care enough to pray, what's that about? So anyway, there's lots of different simple ways like that, including just putting a bumper sticker on your car, the right bumper sticker, not smoking or non-smoking, your eternity matters. Yeah, no one's going to come talk to you about that.
Yeah.
The Christian who thinks it's funny, but the unchurched don't think it's funny.
Right. What's the right bumper sticker?
Right bumper sticker. My favorite ideas is a bumper sticker that's magnetic. I don't advocate putting sticky things on your car. Ruins the resale value, unless you're going to keep the car until it dies. But it's the kind that are on a magnet, and that has something about the church, the URL of the church. By the way, people want the URL. They don't care about your address. They'll find the address for the URL. And then something that's going on. That July, July's over. So September, back to school training for parents. And the URL, which points to either Facebook page or whatever. So people see that, oh, that's interesting. A QR code is handy, although not very good on a road because you're trying to get the picture while you're driving. That's not helpful. But something that talks about what's coming, but something that it matters. Cute and clever sayings don't grow churches. Churches waste a lot of money on their signs by doing cute and clever. You got a church up the street that had this wonderful, our Sundays are as good as Dairy Queen. No one's going to stop by and go to church because of that. It makes them smile, but who goes to church? Oh, look at it. You'll never see a sign on McDonald's that says, hamburgers, the only thing missing is you. They know that they paid $22,000 for that sign to advertise. Folks, use the sign to advertise. What's your upcoming sermon series that's relevant and a title that makes sense to people so they know what the sermon's about? What event do you have coming up? Invite people. Y'all welcome. Everyone presumes that everyone's welcome in a church, so we need to stop saying that. It's not helpful. Use a sign to market. This is a sign that says, stop by here, you will leave different. And don't say that, how to heal your marriage. How to raise kids, how to keep your kids off drugs, how to, those kind of sermon series, people go, oh, maybe I want to go hear that. That's what you put on a sign. That's what you put on a bumper sticker. Something that is attractive that someone says that's relevant and valuable. And if it piques their interest, you got the trifecta, you're in.
Right. Okay. Well, then I think we've gotten through most of the stuff I wanted to talk through. But if I could just add one more thing, is just kind of, do you have anything else that you think our audience should know about church planting, church growth? Just something else that you kind of like to end on?
Have a conversation with your neighbors. Get to know your neighbors. Get to know your coworkers. Spend time with unchurched. The vast majority of Christians spend all their time with Christians. I call it, we're stuck in the Christian ghetto. You can't be faithful to the Great Commission if you don't have friends, not just acquaintances, friends that are not Christians. So let's get real about hanging out with the non-Christians in our life, not so that we can convert them. We don't want an agenda. It's great that happens. We want that to happen. Don't get me wrong. We pray that happens. But just go build some friendships in the unchurched world. It'll do things. One thing it'll do for you is it'll help you see the unchurched perspective. The second thing is it might build a friendship that turns into an eternal friendship. So get out of the church and spend time with the unchurched. That'd be my number one advice for every layperson and every pastor.
All right. That's great advice. Bill, thank you so much for talking with me today, for all the wisdom you shared. It's a huge help.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
You have a wonderful day.
Thanks. You too.